For years, the story of Jeffrey Epstein seemed impossible to explain. A man with enormous wealth, a man surrounded by powerful connections, a man accused of serious crimes. And yet, for decades, consequences appeared limited. Cases stalled, investigations faded, and scrutiny often arrived late. This created one of the most persistent questions in modern criminal history. How did Jeffrey Epstein avoid full accountability for so long? Understanding that question requires more than examining one individual. It requires looking at institutions, at influence, at legal strategy, at media behavior, and at the systems that sometimes fail when power and reputation intersect. Because Epstein's story is not only about crimes, it is about how the structures around those crimes responded. Long before his criminal cases became global news, Epstein had built something unusual. Not just wealth, access. He moved within circles that included financiers, academics, politicians, and celebrities. For many people who met him, he appeared as what he claimed to be, a private investor with elite connections. But Epstein's financial world remained unusually opaque. Unlike most public financiers, there were few transparent records of large investment funds or major corporate leadership roles tied to his name. Journalists who later examined his finances repeatedly noted that the source of his wealth remained difficult to fully trace. Yet despite this uncertainty, Epstein maintained access to some of the most influential environments in the world. And access, in many cases, creates protection, not intentional protection, but social protection. People often hesitate to question someone who appears already trusted by powerful institutions. In the early 2000s, allegations against Epstein began surfacing in Florida. Several young women accused him of sexual abuse. Local police investigations eventually produced substantial evidence and witness statements. By 2006, authorities had recommended serious charges. But what followed became one of the most controversial legal developments in the case. Instead of a full federal prosecution, Epstein entered into a plea agreement in 2008. This agreement allowed him to plead guilty to state-level charges and avoid broader federal charges that had been under consideration. Legal experts later described the arrangement as highly unusual. The agreement also included provisions that shielded potential co-conspirators from federal prosecution. For critics, this moment represented the point where the system first appeared to bend, not necessarily through conspiracy, but through legal strategy and negotiation. In high-profile criminal cases, legal teams play a decisive role. Epstein assembled an exceptionally powerful legal defense team. Attorneys with deep experience in federal law, political networks, and negotiation. High-profile defendants often rely on such teams to challenge investigations, negotiate settlements, and manage media exposure. But in Epstein's case, the defense strategy was particularly aggressive. Documents later revealed that lawyers for Epstein engaged in intense negotiations with federal prosecutors. The goal was clear: avoid a federal trial. Because federal charges often carry far more severe penalties, the result was the controversial plea deal. And once that deal was finalized, the legal path forward became extremely limited. Legal strategy alone cannot explain Epstein's long period of relative freedom. Another factor was reputation. For many years, Epstein had cultivated an image as a philanthropist and intellectual patron. He donated to scientific institutions. He funded academic research. He hosted gatherings that brought together influential figures from multiple fields. This created what sociologists often describe as reputational insulation. When someone is embedded in respected social environments, accusations can initially seem implausible to outsiders. Institutions hesitate, associates distance themselves slowly, and investigations may move cautiously. None of this proves intentional protection, but it demonstrates how social networks can delay scrutiny. Another reason Epstein remained relatively shielded for years was limited early media coverage. Before 2018, the case rarely dominated national headlines. Local reporting existed, court documents existed, victim accounts existed. But sustained national investigation arrived much later. This changed dramatically in 2018 when a series of investigative articles re-examined the 2008 plea deal. Journalists uncovered previously overlooked details. They questioned why federal prosecutors had agreed to such a lenient arrangement, and they brought renewed attention to the voices of victims who had long argued that justice had not been served. Public awareness expanded rapidly, and once attention intensified, legal pressure returned. In July 2019, federal prosecutors in New York arrested Epstein again. This time, the charges were federal. The allegations described a pattern of abuse involving underage victims. The new indictment signaled something important. The legal system was reopening a case that many had assumed was closed. For survivors and investigators who had followed the case for years, the arrest represented a potential turning point. It suggested that earlier failures might finally be addressed, but events would soon take another unexpected turn.
What do we know about Jeffrey Epstein's death? Let's go back to 2019. Epstein was arrested on child sex trafficking charges on July 6th that year.
In August 2019, Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. Officials ruled the death a suicide. However, several procedural failures inside the jail raised serious questions. Required inmate checks had not been performed. Surveillance cameras malfunctioned. Staff shortages had created operational strain. Investigations later confirmed multiple institutional failures. For many observers, these failures intensified doubts about the system that had already allowed Epstein to avoid full accountability for years. The death meant that a full trial would never occur. And without a trial, many questions would remain unanswered. When people say Epstein was protected, they often mean several different things. Some refer to legal privilege, others refer to wealth, others refer to institutional hesitation. The reality likely involves a combination of factors. Wealth provides access to top legal defense. Social networks can reduce early scrutiny. Complex investigations can stall when evidence is difficult to assemble. And public attention can shift away from cases that lack sustained coverage. Each factor alone might not prevent accountability, but together they can delay it. It is tempting to explain complicated cases through simple narratives. But reality is often more complex. Large institutions rarely fail through coordinated conspiracy. More often, they fail through fragmentation. Different agencies working independently, legal negotiations occurring behind closed doors, media attention fluctuating, political pressure rising and falling. In Epstein's case, these factors created an environment where consequences arrived slowly, too slowly for many observers. The Epstein case forced institutions to confront uncomfortable questions. Should plea agreements involving serious crimes face greater transparency? How can prosecutors ensure victims are fully informed during negotiations? What safeguards should exist when powerful defendants face investigation? And how can investigative journalism prevent important stories from disappearing for years? These questions extend far beyond a single case. They touch on how modern justice systems respond to power. Even years after Epstein's death, the case continues to generate attention, not because new crimes are emerging, but because the original questions remain powerful. Why did accountability take so long? What systems allowed delays? And how can those systems improve? Understanding these questions is not about speculation. It is about examining institutions honestly. Because when justice arrives late, trust suffers, and rebuilding that trust requires transparency. The story of Jeffrey Epstein is often framed as a mystery, but in many ways the explanation may be simpler. Wealth, influence, legal strategy. institutional hesitation, and delayed media scrutiny. These forces do not always operate deliberately, but together they can slow accountability. And when accountability slows, the public begins asking questions. Questions that persist long after the case itself ends. Understanding those questions is the only way to prevent similar failures in the future. Because justice is not only about punishment, it is about trust. And trust must be earned.